You people
Good
that are out.
evening,
I'm
everyone.
sorry.
Welcome. Great to have everyone. Welcome to the SUNY Global Center. I'm Johanna Kinder-Holmes. I'm the Director of New York City Special Events and Programs here for the SUNY system based here at the Global Center in New York City. And we're very honored to be partnering with the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce and East Midtown Partnership for this wonderful panel discussion this evening and reception and mixer afterwards. So thank you for joining us. I just want to introduce formally Rob Burns, who is the president of East Midtown Partnership. Not so quickly, Rob. Just want to say that Rob is the Triple Crown recently of Pride recognition. So he has recently been the City and State Pride 100 list. He is also on the Cranes Pride list. And I think our esteemed moderator is also on that Pride list. So yeah, David, thank you. And he is also on the Schneps Media Pride list. So Rob.
That introduction, I don't have to say gay. Thank you, Johanna. Welcome, everybody. Well, I'm going to be very brief. Welcome to East Midtown Manhattan, first of all. Recently, The Real Deal called this the new must-live, must-play destination for Gen Z. So despite its stodgy reputation, we have a lot of great places to eat, to have a drink, to see the theater. So keep coming. Secondly, do say gay. And finally, enjoy the evening. And the faster the panel works up, go ahead, cocktails.
We'll be fast.
Thank you all for being here. And I hope next year, by the way, we have a much bigger Pride celebration now that we're getting out of this damn pandemic. Thanks.
All right, we'll try to make it quick. I know everybody's thirsty. So thank you all for coming. We're here tonight to talk about the impact of education and economics on the LGBTQ rights movement, and we've got an amazing panel with us here today. The real crux of it is that at the end of the day, the LGBTQ movement is about acceptance, and what we're going to talk about tonight is whether or not what's happening in our classrooms and what's happening in our boardrooms are helping or hurting that process. So my name is David Belsky. I'm the founder and CEO of Good Rebellion, a purpose-driven public relations agency. In a past life, I spent about a decade in this building running communications and marketing for the SUNY system, so it's good to be back. And I'm going to let each of the panelists do an introduction of themselves and maybe say a sentence or two about why they're excited to talk about what we're talking about tonight. And then we'll dive into some deep, tough questions. We can start with whoever feels most comfortable.
I guess it'll be me.
All right.
She with the best nails goes first.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, SUNY, and thank you, David, for having me, and Joanna. It's a pleasure being here with all of you. My name is Chanel Lopez. I use she and her pronouns. I am the Deputy Director of LGBTQ Affairs for the governor. And I'm excited to be here. You know, I always look forward to these panels. This is like my 4th, 5th speaking engagement in less than a week, but you know, I always learn something new, and I always are open to the opportunity to educate people.
All right, let's just go this way. Sure.
Well, hi, everyone. Jonathan Lovitz. My pronouns are he and him, and I am the former Senior Vice President of the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, as well as a former Director of NGLCC NY, and we're thrilled to join East Midtown Partnership and the SUNY Global Center for tonight's event. My work, I'm also currently stepping back in for a moment as the Interim Executive Director for NGLCC NY. It's good to be back home in New York for a moment. But my job is at the intersection, as all things at the Chamber, of economics and opportunity for LGBTQ plus people and all of our intersectional allies. It's an amazing privilege, and we're doing, we wouldn't be, I think, where we are in some of our fights without the power of business behind us, and to be helping guide the tip of that spear, particularly for my work in public policy. And I'm going to chat with your boss soon about making sure that our public sectors are keeping pace with our private sector growth.
All right, thanks. Marion?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, David. It's good to see you again. Thank you, Johanna, for inviting me. I'm Marian Terenzio, and I am the president of the State University of New York at Cobleskill. It's a pleasure to be here in my role as a president. I do think my position and point of view and the power I can bring to that is quite important. I think education is still one of the important ways to help defend human rights, if you will. And when you hear the number that the literacy rate is 54% of adults from the age 17 to 64 can read at the 6th grade level and above. I say that because I think that's one of the crux of understanding how to bring together the understanding of human rights and how we deal with diversity. So it's a pleasure to be here just to help with that. Thank you.
Thank you. And John?
And I'm John Diaz, I'm a reporter for CBS New York. Very good friends with Dave Belsky, so thank you, Dave, for having me here. Usually I'm in bed by now because I'm a morning reporter, so I stayed up past my bedtime for this. So you probably see me run right out after this. Yes. 2 a.m. was the wake-up call. But I'm very happy to be here. You know, being a member of the media, I really do feel like we have a lot of responsibility for people and putting certain people on TV and getting certain public inputs out there. So it is very important to have a member of the media be discussing something like this.
And a proud SUNY alum, right?
And a proud SUNY alum, SUNY Albany. Yes, that's where we met.
Yes. All right. So, Marion, I want to start with you. As the educator on the panel, I was hoping you could sort of educate us and set the playing field. Can you tell us a little bit about what is this "don't say gay" thing that everyone's talking about? And you know, we're hearing about that. We're hearing about governors deciding how to hire college presidents based on their political views and appointing college boards based on their political views. And so what is happening in education in America? Help us figure this out. I mean, that's its own panel on its own, but in 2 minutes, tell us what the problem is.
Yeah, 2 minutes, go.
And there's the problem.
Yeah.
I was trying to think how to sum that all up. And I think, first of all, the classrooms are the microcosms of what we're dealing with. And when I thought about what's going on in my role as a president, I realized that higher ed has been at a crossroads. You talked a little bit earlier too. We want to talk about like the culture wars. If you think about that, we always saw ourselves as the mediator with culture wars, and to understand that and to bring more perspective and research and study and say, let's try to find that mediating voice that we can deal with this. We are now in the maelstrom ourselves of the culture war. And it's so interesting because when I looked at that and I realized the idea of, it's a term called the moral panic, right? And I think it is now the collision of culture war and moral panic that even higher education is being the devil and devilized. And what's scary about that, and the reason why I even mentioned literacy earlier, in our classrooms, we all have to be literate on many things, literate on democracy, literate in understanding free speech. I have not spoken about free speech in my 7 years as president, except for the last 2. And academic freedom. If we can't even get those straight and understand that, and where we sit in the culture war as we're getting pulled in, we don't know how to deal with that because we're used to being the education supreme expert in the world, and now we're one of many sources, including media and social media, which isn't helping. I can go further, but I'll just stop right there because I just think that we are in a crisis. Higher ed is in a crisis with all of this as well.
So Shadell, obviously what she just talked about is driven by politics. And you know, you're here from the governor's office, and I have to imagine that you guys are in the crossfire of all this. And you see across the country that people are trying to decide how to educate and how to inform people through the ballot box and through bills and court decisions. What is a governor to do?
Don't put me on the spotlight now. I mean, you know, I listened to Marion talking about culture and literacy, and then I start thinking about like my trans brothers and sisters who don't even make it through the door of the education world because it's not safe for them or it's not equipped for them. I mean, like you said earlier, some folks are like on 6th grade reading level. You know, again, a trans woman who has to do survival work can think about going to school right now, right? So what is the education system doing for the trans community? Absolutely nothing, right? But representation to me, and I always mention this everywhere I go, representation is important. You know, and in the governor's office, we make sure that there's representation and that we hear our community and listen to what our community, you know, needs, right? Like I said before, I'm the Deputy Director of LGBTQ Affairs, and my job is to go out there and speak to my community and bring back to the governor's office their concerns. And a lot of their concerns is education is the biggest one, housing, employment. So what are we doing about that? And what can we do about that?
So we're raising a lot of big issues that I don't think we can answer in half an hour. But so John, the other half of this equation, there's the classroom, and then I mentioned before, there's the boardroom, and a lot of what happens in the boardroom is driven by the media, you know, and all of these, there are so many more LGBTQ stories and characters on television and in the news, and it could be argued that maybe that's not helping so much, that maybe we're pushing too hard, too fast, and that's what's resulting in the political backlash that we're seeing. So,
I mean,
from your media perspective, what do you think about that?
Yeah, you know, you have to look at like the woke TV, and sometimes are we being too woke by throwing in a story character who's a member of the LGBTQ community just because you want to get ratings, you want someone to relate to. I think for media people and for entertainment in general and stuff like that, they have to do a better job with portraying people and showing the gay kid doesn't have to be the frail kid who gets picked on and beat up. It could also be the college football player. It could also be all those other different things. We don't, you know, I'm 33, right? And growing up, Will and Grace was a big to do, right? And I remember watching Will and Grace and like hiding watching it from my parents because they didn't want that, because Jack and Will were like the two main characters of culture at the time. You know, people, they kind of helped introduce gay people to, and you always want to be more of a Will and not of a Jack, you know what I mean? Because you don't want to be that, but it's not okay. It's not okay to feel that way, that you want to you want to blend in and be a Will. It's okay to be a Jack, but it's so important for people in the media entertainment to show all different types of LGBT members. We shouldn't just be showing a Will and a Jack. We shouldn't be just showing them. We have to show so many different things. We also have to just know the right time to play those characters correctly. You know, you start watching a show and you're like, oh, well, when are they going to introduce the closeted kid who's struggling with that? Sometimes you don't have to introduce that. And sometimes the kid, he doesn't have to be struggling with that. Sometimes that kid could be the popular kid. You know, sometimes that gay kid could be the homecoming king. It doesn't have to be a struggle to come out of the closet.
Right. Fair enough.
Or that trans woman of color doesn't have to play the prostitute.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Very fair. Very fair.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, I mean, a lot of what he's just talking about, obviously we all know that media is owned by corporations, and at the end of the day, news or entertainment, they're there to make money. And there's kind of this like push and pull that I think corporations are facing right now. Do we do as much as we can? You know, it helps us look woke and it helps us score points with Gen Z, and we'll make a lot of money on that end. But on the other hand, you've got people who are upset that it's too much. And you've even got people in the LGBT community saying it's not enough, you're rainbow washing, and we don't even appreciate what you're doing. So what do you say to a CEO who calls you and say, what should I be doing about all this?
First of all, don't stop. One of my favorite examples in the world is when Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, introduced transition assistance for anyone who, whether part-time, intern, you name it, wanted to transition genders while working for Starbucks. And the backlash from 1 million moms, let's be honest, it's 2 angry Karens, is the pushback was, well, we're going to boycott your coffee and we don't need this. And he said, we won't miss you, because the community who actually wants to support equality will spend more money and be a lot more appreciative of the work our company does. And that's what matters. I mean, the pink dollar, the famous LGBTQ spending amount, is $917 billion. Use it well, damn it. Not all chicken nuggets taste the same. Some taste like they hate you. So why would you give them your money? So knowing that, we counsel CEOs, we counsel our small business owners. You do the right thing with total authenticity. And at this point, screwing it up is kind of on you, because there are enough mechanisms out there, enough highly qualified trainers and educators and teachers who can put the authentic voice at the table. And one of the most important things we all can do, especially as allies, even within our own microcosms of communities, is call out when those tables are inconsistently set. If anyone remembers Tumblr back in the day, there used to be great page about all male panel. And it was a whole bunch of straight white dudes over 65 talking about the future of diversity in America. How awkward for them. And now when we continue, if we do see something like that, we see an ad where clearly you've hoisted someone into your ad campaign for the purpose of checking a box versus the purpose of telling a true story, we know how to call that out. And the competitor set is going to do the better version of that. Right. It's going to do the accurate version of that. And I frankly think, we've got unprecedented intersectional support because our fights are universal. LGBTQ people are women. We are people of color. We are veterans. We are immigrants. We are. There is no such thing as a queer fight that's not somebody else's fight and vice versa. And we better start acting like it. Because what they're coming for on Monday means they're coming for you on Thursday and coming for his marriage on Friday. So better start acting in solidarity. But with that also means the solidarity between communities who are looking out for each other. And I think we, particularly the LGBTQ movement, have a lot that we owe to particularly the struggles of the Black Lives Matter movement happening in the course of the pandemic, when we were all watching Twitter very carefully and saying, we appreciate your CEO's lovely statement. What's next? 10 years ago, the statement might have been enough to say we're anti-racist. Okay, great. Now show me your $10 million contribution to getting 100 new kids into HBCUs, to restructuring your board to show gender and racial diversity. Show me action, or show yourself the door.
Yeah, fair enough. So Chanel, back to you, because what Jonathan said got me going. There's obvious, well-intentioned or not, there's obviously some level of backlash happening in America, because we're seeing bills like Don't Say Gay. We're seeing the Texas Republican Party this week officially declaring that the LGBT quote unquote lifestyle is abnormal.
Certainly expensive.
That's being a woman.
Okay.
So, and it's easy living in New York to say, oh, it can't happen here. But we had a Supreme Court decision today who, after New York was very proud of its very strict gun laws and made us feel safer, was taken out from under us. So can it happen in New York? And
absolutely.
And what are you all doing to stop it?
It can happen in New York. And why it can happen in New York? Because we're not out there voicing our opinions, and we're not out there, voting. We are letting these middle-aged crisis men sit on the chair and make decisions for many of us.
I feel like everyone's starting to interrupt you, but we feel like we feel so safe here that we forget that we have to continue to fight. Right. And yes. I just did a story on how
we get too comfortable sometimes.
But how bills like this, and someone, actually a writer I worked with, used it perfectly. Bills elsewhere could become contagious, and it could leak into New York State. And we even not just New York State, but Jersey, Connecticut, the whole tri-state area, we're more liberal than elsewhere, but it could become contagious. And when you look at what you did
today, those that get mostly affected are the LGBTQ community, right? Especially trans women who are constantly getting shot. Who are, just this year alone, there's been 14 homicide of trans women of color
that we know of.
That we know of, and that are not misgendered in social media.
So are there things that a governor or a legislature in a liberal state can be doing to protect that from happening here?
Continue fighting for our rights and listening to our voices and making our voices be heard.
Well, and a shout out to your boss and team, because the governor here, much like many of the other progressive governors in the Northeast, is putting a heavy premium on voter education.
Yes, absolutely.
1 in 5 LGBTQ people does not vote. Every one of us has an opinion. And yet we're not showing up when it's critical. Yeah, especially in a state like this. And I'm in Pennsylvania, where the only thing standing between, basic civil rights and not is my governor's pen. And that's on very thin ice right now.
Even let me get started with Pennsylvania.
Oh.
But that's
Trade you.
But that is so critically important and to teach the students
Yes.
the power of their vote, because then it shows, again, back to the cultural wars, if the cultural war, and we are in our own cultural war, saying to the politicians, we're going to vote you in or out. But if the politics becomes the definer or the reflection of the backlash cultural war of don't say gay, there is no room for compromise.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot to lose. To your point, what kind of representatives do we want? And how do we help get the vote and the education behind that? Critically important. One of the biggest things I do that I'm very proud is that I vote. I vote every single time.
And you vote for the right person.
Yes,
Because many of us,
Right.
I'm not, I've heard people say, I'm not voting for so-and-so because I don't like them. What you don't like about them? You know what I'm saying? But what are their values? What are they about? What are they going to contribute to America? That's what you have to worry about.
And you know,
And you can't say you love people and vote for people who will hurt them.
Exactly.
Right. So, it's scary that for a long time, we felt like we were on this right trajectory, that more and more people were
Yeah.
feeling acceptance of the LGBT community. And it almost feels like we're regressing a little bit broadly. Jonathan, when you're not doing this, you're moonlighting as the next Harvey Milk and running for office. And I know part of running for office, we run political campaigns, is you're on the ground, you're talking to people every day. What are you hearing? Why is this shift feel like it's changing?
Well, as I am often wont to do, I will shift your premise slightly because
You're not Harvey Milk.
what I find, both as someone who works in the space in economics, in working tangentially with academia, and certainly in politics, you speak to folks on the ground and they're scared. They're scared to exactly what you were alluding to. They don't know the impact of one vote. And in your case, people don't, they think of presidents, they think of governors. I think it's less than 1 in 20 can name their state representatives, yet they're the ones who set their tax policy, their license policies, their clean water, their air, you name it, but they don't know because they don't know what these people can do. In your case, an election in New York dictates who ends up on governing boards of universities and who, just like this week, decides who does and doesn't yank books out of libraries.
Right.
As is happening in this state as we speak.
Yeah.
So it matters, and it matters that each and every one of us share why we're involved, and whether, and I joke all the time, whether you're doing, high kicks in the glitter skirt at the front of the parade, or you're just in the back holding the sign, be there. Be in the fight, whatever it is for you and whatever scale you're comfortable, but you don't have a choice to sit out. If you care about queer people, if you care about women, if you care about anyone else, and you sit it, remember what got us through the 80s and 90s, and it was the concept that silence equals death. Mm-hmm. That has never been more true.
Yeah, and I think that, there's a big struggle in the idea that people are entitled to their opinions. But when it comes to human rights, are they? No. Is there you can have your opinion, or is it just right and wrong? As a news reporter,
Knew you were going to come to me.
and not just a talking head on CNN. You're one of those real news reporters that is expected to tell the news and not their opinions. How do you balance that? If you come to the table and you have a story and there are quote unquote two sides to a human rights issue like LGBT rights, how is the news supposed to do that in a way that is both responsible yet doesn't make people feel like you're choosing a side?
I think there's a loaded question, but I think there's a lot of, it's booking is going into it, in the news. A lot of people don't realize, for me, for local, we do a lot more. I'm a lot more grassroots reporter on the street reporting, but for a more network kind of thing, when things happen, that's when booking is so important. Like bookers are out there making sure they get one side and the other side. Because yes, you have to have both sides, but also at the same time, you need to give them the facts and then have people give the opinions as well. You know what I mean? Have a panel discussion like this. You see CNN and Fox News, all of them kind of do a panel discussion. And they always have that one person who's like that liberal or that conservative. And you're like, oh, you just did that to get that point of view in. But it is important. It is important to make sure you get that. So you could also learn from their point of view, and you can make your point of view even stronger. You know what I mean? You could see that person saying those things that are in your mind so negative and so wrong, but it makes you feel so much stronger for your beliefs. So by being fair and balanced, you're kind of you know, helping these people even feel more secure with who they are and how they're feeling about it. So I think it's important to always have both sides. You know, it's always important to hear people's, and also then you become complacent. Like, you know, we're just talking about being in New York and feeling so safe here, but then we forget that other parts of the country aren't like that. So you have to have that other voice in there to realize, oh yeah, people do think that way still.
And this is one of those moments where this hits so squarely with the difference between equality and equity. Because one is a piece of paper that says, yes, two things are equal. One is an actual lived experience.
Yeah.
The first generation trans Latina immigrant in Manhattan is living a very different experience than the one in Mississippi. They're both not great, but the resources are different. And, you know, we're at the chamber, we're talking about a business community. We could be married in 50 states, but 35 of those states still allow it to be perfectly legal to walk in and say, my husband and I would like to start a business. And they say, we don't have to give you any money. You're not a protected class, good luck.
Right.
So we are not done. But when I have this conversation, people say, well, what about the Bostock decision? You're protected in the workplace everywhere. Didn't that fix everything? Yes, if I'm fired in Manhattan, my rights and recourses are very different than if I'm fired in Mississippi.
Right.
And so similarly with the news, yes, book everyone you want on both sides. But if they say something that's factually inaccurate and you don't put that asterisk on there, that is a total failure of journalism. And it's great. And I think even if you have to shut someone's mic off and say, actually, what he just said is a direct citation from, you know, someone the Southern Poverty Law Center has said is a hate group, you better say so, because if we start allowing people to bring, you know, whatever knives they want to whatever gunfights they think is appropriate, we all lose.
Yeah, even if you air something one day and you don't realize there's something wrong, come an hour or two later, be like, hey, by the way, this person said this, they were wrong. We'd fact checked them and they were wrong. You know, that is very important.
I mean, so Marion, we have college campuses are known as the bastions of the protectors of the First Amendment and academic freedom. And don't you dare tell me I can't write or talk or preach or teach about something. How do you balance that on a college campus and or education in general? You've got parents demanding that their kids not be, you know, shown these terrible things. But what do you do about that?
Someone get her a drink.
Yeah, right.
She's earned
I
it.
keep asking you the tough ones.
There's many levels of that. And the first is that, you know, when I was younger, people said, you know, the personal is political, you need to put yourself out there. And they used to say no. And then when I became a president, I'm like, hell yes. Because what has happened, particularly in COVID, the students know who I am. The very vulnerable are showing up at my door. So on a symbolic level, I'm there with them. A couple other things, though, that we have to teach ourselves, because, you know, higher ed sometimes becomes, I know, arrogant.
Not you.
You know.
Ivory Tower, what?
Right. So couple things I'm doing on my campus, and by the way, I belong to the National LGBTQ Presidents Group, who met last week to start figuring out next steps with education. K-12 was with them.
It's awesome.
It is awesome. But a couple things that we have to think about is when somebody says something, I'm saying to my staff and everybody, starting in my office, don't let them get away with that. Don't laugh. If they're saying something wrong or a rumor, you must stop it. You don't have to answer it with the next step, but you just reinforce the crazy nonsense of going in people's heads.
Yes.
The other thing I'm doing is, and I think all colleges can do this, our structure has to change. So I've started what I call an administrative conference. Every policy on campus is being reviewed by campus groups, looking at students with disabilities, LGBTQ students, to say this has to change because that structure is not reality. It is not the truth anymore. And the other interesting thing is, because I believe in using COVID, I hate to use that word, but it's been a privilege to lead in COVID. Somebody has to do it on campuses. I'm glad it's me, even though it's taken its toll. We're going to use what we call, I don't know if you've ever heard of trauma-informed therapy. I'm taking that clinical model with our faculty for all students. This is the time. What is the even playing field for every type of student right now? Is their mental health issue. Their stressors, every single student. I have found common ground with all of them. And I'm in the middle of a very conservative county. And the faculty said, how can we help? How do we meet the students? And I can have the students coming from the ag side with the liberal arts students, and they're sitting down with me because we found common ground. But if we use this trauma-informed idea, we're saying to everybody, you're safe here. But you have to do that because people tell me, all right, here's what you have to do for the students with disabilities. Here's what you have to do with students of color. Here's what you have to do with the LGBTQ students. It's all the same. And you have to understand what they come in with, their stressors and their levels of transition. Our job in higher ed is to change and transform them, whether it's to build them up that they are worth it, or whether to say, you have to take many others into account, or we have failed. We have failed. It is a big task. And I just can talk about some of the things we're thinking about now on my campus.
I want to ask, we're getting to near the end, so I want to ask everyone the same question. Can the LGBTQ plus community overcome the polarization of America that we're seeing?
If we stick together, yes. If we educate ourselves, yes. I mean, I just want to add, like, I work for an amazing administration where we have a huge LGBTQ division where, you know, we have, it's one of the highest rate, I don't want to say rate, it's one of the highest in employment and for this administration for the LGBTQ. And this is what I mean, like, we sit together, we brainstorm, we listen to the community's concerns, we come back, we all sit together again and we talk about, you know, how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna make a difference? How are we gonna take these challenges and turn them into something, you know, positive? So, and of course, and like, again, yes, we can overcome anything if we stick together.
I'm sorry, these are clip-ons because you should have dropped that.
Nice.
But that's exactly right. I mean, solidarity is the only way. And again, and not just in our community, it's solidarity with the fact that every community is under attack. And we all said, and this is particularly true of the work we do in the business community, making sure that we're all in one voice when working on policy, is that we always said the rising tide lifts all boats, but we always said that from our own boat across a very big harbor, just in case anybody swam over and tried to sink us, because we're a little busy over here. We have to tie the boats together or there's no point in sailing, to extend the metaphor. Because if anyone's left behind, we failed in the equality movement. And it's particularly salient in our community that particularly the wealthiest gay white men who got everything that they invested in for marriage and left, come back. Because we're not done. And we're not done by a long shot.
I don't think we will ever be done.
Nope. And that's a good thing. You know, and because we deal with this, I mean, we certify LGBT-owned businesses and we tell people we've got 1.4 million queer CEOs around America. And people said, oh, that's fantastic. You guys, you know, you've done the thing. I was like, can you name 2? And then can you name 2 more Black CEOs and 2 more women CEOs? I was like, no, we are not done. We have got.
You named 2 trans women CEOs.
Yes, but but the best part is because of the work we do at the chamber, we can say they don't have to be the CEOs, you know, appointed by a board of a Fortune 100. I can tell the story of a trans woman who owns a construction company that just got a $20 million contract to build the roads in a Republican state where they would never have allowed her to participate in the bid because the corporation in charge of the bid said, she's with us. That's someone I can point to as an opportunity model.
Yeah.
And that means not only are we not done, but we've got really, really good role models to show kids that they're not done either.
That's half of it for sure. And that I think education has to understand it's the strongest democratic tool we have. And it's getting pushed aside with all these other, what I call the symbolisms of the hatred and the devil. And it takes leaders. Education leaders have to stand up, have to feel uncomfortable, but figure out how to bring everybody to the table. And we have to give each other the grace and the patience and the excuse to say, okay, you're not using the right terminology, it's figured out, because people blow up. If you blow up, no one else is going to try it again, right? And how do we build that graciousness? And if I had time, I'd tell you a fantastic story.
You can take it my time. Go ahead, tell it.
So this was on.
There's nothing between your story but this and booze, so take your time, sis.
Go ahead.
I'll see you at the bar.
No, tell your story.
But it's so metaphorical. So I had hundreds of students come who were, I'm using the mask mandate, but they did represent groups, you could tell. And they were ready for a fight with me. And I put myself in the middle of this because you must be there. Yes. So one thing led to another. I start off by saying, I report to, and I listed 10 people I have to report to, the governor, everybody, right? And they all have different things to say. So I turned to the students and I said, what advice would you give me? And they heard the differences. Everybody calmed down. Then one fact came out, another fact, you're wrong. And I said, stop. This is what you have to do with the students. I'm going to hear 200 different points of view, and I'm going to believe each one of you because you're trying to come here educated and well-intended. Even though you're contradicting each other, we're going to sit together and figure this out. And then they started telling very hard stories of being bullied. All the other stories started coming out, and they were from all sides of the aisle. And they left. The one who I thought was going to give me the hardest time shook my hand and said, thank you. I will do whatever to make people feel safe. Okay, now that was a metaphor, but think about that. If you start somewhere, where you can go next. And that's why I'm so privileged to be a president. I really am. So thank you for a couple of you.
Oh, you're welcome.
But I have a feeling you're going to still say something.
I would just say absolutely yes. It's, it's very much a team effort. I don't know why this popped up in my head, but one time I took one of my good friends to Flaming Saddles, my favorite gay bar in the city, and she puts her coat down. She's like, is someone going to steal this? I'm like, no, you're in a gay bar. No one's going to do it. I know that might be ignorant to me to say, but I feel like we're all in it together, and you're there in a safe space, and no one's going to try and steal your coat. I mean, I know people probably has got their coats stolen, but I just feel like we're all in it together. And as long as we stay in it together, we're good. Yes, we can overcome it.
Johanna, how does the questions work now?
So if you have a question, the red button here, turn on your mic and ask it, and then turn it off.
Okay, excellent. All right, who's got questions?
Flaming Saddles with fast food bar.
Yeah, I've been there with you.
It's a judgment-free zone.
It's very good.
Not so much a question as a statement. Absolutely. I happen to live in Florida, and I happen to also be part of Stonewall National Museum Archive on the board. And I stood up at a gathering and after the governor had talked about Don't Say Gay. And I felt it was most important that we not only speak up, we rally, continue to pepper our senators of the state and let people know that it isn't right. Stay gay, say it loudly, keep on saying it.
Yes.
You're here.
Well, and David, can I throw, because we teamed up, the National Chamber, we've got 60 affiliates in the US and around the world. We teamed up with our 4 Florida chambers in a joint statement. And one of the most important things that we reminded people is, we know the knee-jerk reaction is to boycott and say to hell with it, Florida, you're on your own. But we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater and then light the bathtub on fire, because we've left our own alone there. There are queer people who are in Florida, and especially those who can't afford to leave, who need us to keep investing and growing in Florida with the right values and spending our $917 billion in consumer power effectively. And one of the most important things, especially a lot of folks in here who are corporate change makers and work in the industries that can do things like bring events to Florida, you need to reward the people who are doing it right. The Miamis and Fort Lauderdales and Tampas who are passing the non-discrimination orders, who are including our businesses in city procurement, who are doing the things that say, don't listen to the nutties in Tallahassee. If you're here, you're family. Oh God, I just used an Olive Garden metaphor. breadsticks at Pride. How dare I? But more importantly, that's just such an important thing because Florida is a microcosm for what's happening in so many places. All these conferences, we saw it with the bathroom bills and all. And yes, we want to punish the people doing it wrong, but you cannot say forever and always, we're never going to Florida or never going to North Carolina. I mean, soon we're not going to be able to go to 30 states if we believe in that. We cannot leave the people there to rot. They need us. They need our solidarity. They need us big male brothers and sisters in the big cities who have no problem walking down the street, holding a hand, doing the high kicks in the parade to make sure that we do.
Accountable.
Okay. And holding the politicians accountable, that we are not forgetting them because they watch us on TV thinking, I hope somehow, someday I can get out of here. But you know what? If everyone leaves Florida, then there's no hope for the kid who's looking, right? Well, yeah, but we cannot rid these places under attack of the future role models and leaders that they need. So thanks for standing up and shouting, and I think everyone has to.
My question is for Marian, about misinformation and queer education on social media, because I feel as somebody who does a lot of research on it, it's hard finding it and sharing it. And I feel like the war against people who are just constantly filling the social networks of misinformation is winning against academia, because academia is like on books and literature and lectures. And there's all these niche little markets in the area who are aware of what's going on. But as a grander scale, people who are not a part of that community, I feel like they're getting left behind, and all they have is social media, which is free for everyone. And then I was just want to know, how would you handle like getting the word out and educating our future generation? Because I feel like a lot of them don't know their queer history. And I feel like they're repeating a lot of things that we try to avoid, and people who live through it are going through it now.
Well said. Well said. Higher ed wants to walk away from it. We can't. We've got to start understanding what's going on there. And that's because it's building like-minded, and that's what I was talking about, the cultural war, which is very scary and demonic. And it'd be interesting to see what my LGBTQ president colleagues came up with last week, because I couldn't go to the meeting. But the thing is to start working in the middle schools, right? And even younger, and even in the daycare centers. And I know in Florida, I wouldn't be able to do that. I get that. But but academia has to get out of that ivory tower mentality, is what you're saying. And we don't. We actually have juniors in high school on our campus who are going to get a high school degree and a college degree. We have to put in different structures, to your point, and get those barriers away. So when I learn what's going to happen, and I think my campus is pretty cool, but I'm going to hear barriers that I'm going to be surprised. But we have to come to the table like that, whether it's through NASH. All right, I'm going to turn the tables on you now, David. Okay. Because the systems have to help us. You're right. We're lucky. We've got a chancellor who's to die for. We've got a governor. And I just came from a president's meeting, all the SUNY presidents. And we're saying, what are we doing? We've got to get our sea legs back. But you have hit this right on the head very well. And it's shedding ourselves and getting in areas that we were not traditionally in. And everybody should be teachers. Right. So I'm going to be even working with Black farmers, because I'm in ag school, bringing them on campus to start working with our high school and middle school kids to learn about farming and give them college credit, for good God's sake. To your point, I hope I'm answering it a little bit. It's a fantastic question.
Well, and it's schools are teaching, or have really abdicated, because there's just no room for it in the curriculum most days. Basic civic education. We stopped doing that when we taught people, who the mayor of your town is in second grade.
Right.
And if everyone gets a second, the Secretary of Education had a really great Pride ceremony and webinar and talked about practical strategies for the classroom, knowing everyone and their Karen mother will be recording everything that's said in the classroom.
Correct.
So talk about the things that are universal, like voting, like participation.
Yeah.
And then if you won't in school, That's your obligation to start that fight over Thanksgiving dinner. You have to. Stop advocating it to the schools because they may not be able to. But I also love someone in the comments, and I love that it was said on like a federal government webinar, but said, when will you start teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and bullshitometry? Because we don't teach our kids how to discern what isn't real. And that is a critical skill, needs to be part of everyone's education.
So one thing to change right now is when people say, I believe, make them, and this is actually from my wife's Pat, hi Pat, she's a professor, to say, stop, what do you think? Because when people get away with, I believe, there's nowhere to go with that. So, okay, so when you say, I think, you better have the rationale behind it. So she's done that. I've done it with my students. Stop. You cannot use the word believe in this classroom. And it changes your attitude because then you're accountable. Sorry, Pat.
And to your point about systems, I'm happy to put on the spotlight. You know what the leaders of the higher ed systems are trying to do right now is get themselves aligned in a way that measures social mobility.
Yes.
And holding systems of higher education accountable for whether or not they are raising the bar in social mobility for the students that are coming to their campuses. And that could mean how many CEOs do we get graduate and how many patents do we get? But it could also mean how many kids come to our campus unable to read that leave when they do, that can read when they leave.
And that's to your social mobility, to your point, many people are scared of that because higher ed was for a certain level of person. Now we need to do better with access, but social mobility, whoa, wait, what's going on here? I'm not going to share anything with you. So that's becoming devilized. That word, it's crazy.
So we'll have to come up with a new word for it, but that's what they're doing. Yes.
I feel compelled to share a story. My wife teaches in a grade school in Southern Connecticut, and just today was the end of a bit of a trauma. For the last couple of weeks, a parent who wanted to come in and read a new book out about Harvey Milk. Apparently, it teaches the history of the flag. The flag. I haven't read it. I don't know the title, but this parent who's not a member of the community, whose children aren't, she just wanted to come in and read this story. And the fourth grade teacher, my wife has been teaching for a long time, so she's become a bit of a mentor. They asked Amy, what do you think of this? And she said, it's a great idea because she loves reading. She teaches reading. She said, have them come in. And they had to go through so much. I can't believe this happened. But you're gonna love the end. She had to get permission from every student. They had the idea they could opt out. The superintendent got involved and said, well, they need to be able to opt out of this. Luckily, nobody opted out. The sky didn't fall, and they never asked if the book was on the shelf. My Amy has the book on the shelf in the library. So the book's there, but all this rigmarole about. So I guess it's timely. I just didn't really want to believe this was so necessary that we're here, but.
Well, I have something to say to that actually, because it's yesterday, I'm from Long Island, and Smithtown is the town next door to me. Did everyone hear about this? Yes. And my sister lives in St. James, so that's literally, she takes my nieces to that library, and she will never go back to that library over all this. It's insane. It's just insane yeah.
Well, and there's a really great, first of all, I also love this setup. It's like the gayest model UN I've ever seen. This is fun. But the library analogy is great. And I've heard so many, particularly high school educators say, I didn't have to send home a permission slip to the gay kids when they read Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
And they turned out just fine. So I just don't buy that false equivalency at all.
And you're right, this room was built to model the UN.
That's why I feel so at home in here.
This building was originally meant to be an international education hub for SUNY, and they built this room like the UN. So
as a former UF model UNer, I'm so proud to be here.
Things no one else in the world
right?
know, but I do.
I love it.
Other questions? Yes.
In a former life, I was the head of the School of Information at SUNY Buffalo. We taught courses on critical thinking. Yeah. And that was, if those courses are still being taught, because it's been 20 years since I was active in academia, then I would think they would have the components, at least they did back in the day when I developed them, to combat the disinformation that we see today in society, whether it's through social media or whether it's through CBS local radio or TV, or where I am at CNN. It's certainly critical thinking is part of our higher education and should be taught in elementary and secondary school as well.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. They are, and I know SUNY's putting in new gen ed requirements.
Good.
And for the lack, it's called, what we do, it's called vertical learning versus lateral learning. And you've got to immerse people in what they're doing to really understand that and to get grasp, particularly, young people. But it can't get, the faculty have to learn how to use the critical thinking now, not just theory-wise, but they're afraid to say things in the classroom. And some people, and then students start in and they don't know how to, they don't have the tools to know what to do. So we have to help with that as well. We have to do a lot more professional training of our faculty. They're well-intentioned, but they're scared. They don't know how to approach the material.
Yeah.
Hey, so my question is, I feel that on the topic of younger generation, right, there's also topic and
Silo.
yeah. So I know like many, have a lot of energy. However, I feel that there's a gap.
Can I ask a question? You said, I feel like, how do you think about that? Yeah, because I think that, I'm just, why are you thinking that? So we can, because otherwise, again, we've got to get better with our language too. So what are you seeing that makes you think that's the case?
I feel that there are a lot of us who live in our bubble.
Okay, so it's, okay.
It is hard to find
Yeah.
feel that hard.
And-
This discussion is talking about
Right.
how we call it.
Right.
So
Right.
what are some
Well, the one thing to share is you start talking about acculturation, assimilation, the idea that, we used to be a melting pot. And I think part of it is, what do you want to hold on to for your identity, right? And how does that, do you want it to mesh? Or if you do you lose yourself? So what I think, what I'm seeing is that people want to hold on to that because otherwise, what do they become? Or you conceal who you are. So I think we have to do more of understanding that your identity is as sacred as it is to become a part, but a part of what?
Well, and you so eloquently said, I think is at the crux of all DEI work out there is you can't be what you can't see. And if you are in any, if you are in any position to be in a room that is either homogenous or super full of its own echo chamber, you need to but not only invite, you need to throw the chair down at the table and say, thanks so much for inviting me because you trust me and I'm safe. You need to hear from my sister who you have never heard from and whose perspective you have no relationship to. That's the only way. Invite yourself and throw that folding chair at the table because no one's going to invite you to it.
So, Chanel, what are some ways that you found have been successful to bridge the gap between different groups that may not necessarily think of themselves as part of the same?
Again, representation. To me, representation means everything. I have many members of the trans TGNC community who come up to me and be like, wow, there's someone that's like me in government, and I remember before I came to work at the governor's office, I worked at the City Commission on Human Rights, and I was helping a trans sister of mine through email. They didn't know I was trans, and they were literally so nervous to go into the building. And so I told them, I said, let me know when you're downstairs. I'll meet you by security, and I'll bring you back up. I'll bring you up so you can meet with a lawyer. And she told me that she went around the block at least 5 times before she walked into that building. And when she saw me, her whole attitude just changed. And you could see that she brought her guard down. you know, because she was so guarded and so afraid because of, like, you know, hasn't been a good rapport between government, NYPD, and the trans community. So representation to me is everything.
And wasn't it Shirley Chisholm who said if there's no seat for you at the table, bring one with you?
Well, that's it. I mean, that's so much, and it's timely because we're going to go upstairs and drink and toast to that solidarity. But that's what is at the crux of the chamber is all these people who felt like, oh, I was the only one in the village. No one understood my needs. There was no one to go talk to at a bank about starting my business plan. There was a girl, we got a whole network. We are 1.4 million strong in the United States, and then add all the allies to it, we are a massive force to be reckoned with. And as each and every one of us goes up the ladder, it is morally, if not literally required that you throw that ladder down and pull up others with you, because none of us are here, would be here without the generations of force, especially the ones that we lost.
I think we have time for one last question.
Who wants to drink?
Thank you. I just want to say, through my experience of research, nightlife is when I say nightlife, but entertainment is like the college global community that we all have in connection and Facebook groups. I've reached out and met many people who if they didn't have a group, they created a Facebook group, and you see all these little villages together. And I just wanted to get that out. So if you don't see a group that you can recognize and connect to, I encourage you to create a Facebook group. When you start researching groups, you find so many around that created their own little spots, categories. Like there's outdoor activities. So I just wanted to make that statement because I research parties and events, and that has been the one thing I think brings everyone together, no matter what country you're from, big or small, whatever you identify with, we all could come together with entertainment. And that's been like the thing that I wanted to, coming to this panel, I wanted to share that academia should use these gay regional magazines of entertainment to educate and inform, because the one thing people are always looking out is going out, having a good time. It's the best way to reach people who you would never feel will come into a structure that they don't feel comfortable with, like you said, like a building or a government center that they never, but a nightlife, the club that you're known familiar with, if you put information in that, I feel like that can grow and bring all the communities, big or small, together.
I will say, so during the pandemic, my husband and I, my good friends all know this, we moved to Connecticut during the pandemic, and I felt a little isolated because I lived in New York for so long. And I was like, oh, I'm around all these straight people. This is weird. And I looked on Facebook group, and it was the Fairfield County Gays. And there were so many gay people. And I was like, oh my God, there's so many gay people in this county. This is great. And I felt so much more welcome and belonged, you know what I mean? And something like that, just a Facebook group, knowing there's all these gay people in Fairfield County, I was like, I belong here. This is great. So seeing that representation is huge.
So challenge to everyone, as you close out Pride Month, go to a party you would normally not go to.
And if there isn't one, start one, because someone's looking for it. All right. Good job, David.
With that, normally I would ask you for your final thoughts, but I think everyone's had their mic drop moment at this point. So I just want to say thank you very much. It was an excellent conversation. Thank you to everyone.